This encounter happened in the summer of 2006, when I was just 20 years old. I didn't get my driver's license until January of that year, and driving opened up so many doors for me that I took a lot of solo road trips to my friends' houses in the New England and Mid-Atlantic states. I also looked pretty young for my age, and was often mistaken for a high school student in my early 20s. I was driving alone on I-78 on a random July day, on my way to visit my friend in southern Pennsylvania for a long weekend. Her parents were away, and we had the house to ourselves. We were planning on drinking or hot tubbing and watching Planet Earth drunk. It had just come out at the time. Maybe to run around some cornfields at night. I was so excited and had a great drive, listening to good music, and it was just a beautiful overall day. Right after I crossed the border from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, I stopped at one of the first rest stops to get gas and snacks for the last part of my drive. I've since tried to figure out which rest stop this was, but I can't ID it. It was just a gas station with a large mini-mart. Opposite the gas station was the on-ramp back to I-78 West, and parallel to the on-ramp was a dirt road, which comes into play later. I was heading into the store when a man in his late 30s to early 40s approached me. He was a very stocky guy, decently tall, had on a plain black tee and jeans with dark brown hair and a mustache. He had come out of a black pickup truck parked a few spaces away from my car. The man had a super intense gaze, and immediately creeped me out. He just had a sort of crazy energy about him. I don't really get vibes from people that often, but this was just so strange. He stood too close. His gaze was crazy direct and focused. His word choice was weird. Immediately, he set off all of my alarms. He asked if I was from the area, despite my Connecticut license plate, where I was headed to, if I knew anything fun to do because he had plans later and time to kill beforehand. He invited me to play mini-golf or watch a movie with him. I didn't answer any of his questions, declined his invitation to hang out, and told him I didn't know the area at all. I walked away towards the store. I was blown away that he asked me to go somewhere with him. It was really random and made me a bit uncomfortable. As I was walking away, he actually screamed out, "You're gorgeous," and the volume and tone made my hair stand on end. It was aggressive and inappropriate, and he startled the family walking out of the store because it was so loud. I didn't turn around to look at him, but just went inside. He came into the store shortly thereafter, and kept staring at me, so I went to use the bathroom and stayed in for at least 10 minutes, texting my friend all about this creepo. When I came out, he wasn't in the store anymore, so I took my time buying drinks and snacks. I went out to gas up my car. I was relieved because his car was gone, and started thinking about the rest of my drive, getting excited to see my friend. When I pull up onto the road to get back to the highway, though, I hear someone persistently honking his horn, and see this creep show on the dirt road parallel to the on-ramp in his truck, honking, shouting, and waving at me to drive over to him. He was directly facing the gas station, and had been waiting for me to pull up. I immediately freaked out and jumped onto the on-ramp back to I-78. He pulled onto the highway after me, and I called my friend, extremely scared. I started to drive faster, and probably a bit dangerously. Looking back, I'm lucky that I didn't get into an accident because I was driving so fast, but I didn't know what else to do. He didn't follow me for that long, and I think after a few exits he finally pulled off. My friend and I had a backup plan that if I ever saw his car again, she would direct me to a police station the next town over from her house, instead of my going directly there and leading some freak to us. I didn't see the car again, and went to my friend's. But the last hours of my drive, I was extremely tense and anxious. I remember checking my mirrors regularly for this black pickup truck. It all ended well. I got to my friend's house safely, and we had a pretty nice weekend. The encounter was definitely creepy, but over the years I didn't put that much more thought into it. A few years ago, around 2014, I was talking with another friend who's big into serial killers and mentioned my encounter jokingly, suggesting this might have been one. I told her my experience. She was fascinated and wanted to Google active serial killers in the Pennsylvania area at the time. The first hit was for Adam Leroy Lane, and he looked almost exactly like the man I met back in 2006. Obviously, it could just be my mind filling in the blanks, but the basic characteristics and the time and area all match up. In my memory, he was a bit slimmer than the pictures, and it was 2006, not 2007, when he was actually convicted of murdering women. Still, it's an odd coincidence, and one I've never forgotten. My fiance and I threw a dinner party one time to celebrate his mom completing chemo. I hired a caterer. We were expecting 25 friends and family, so it was more than the kitchenette of our single-story ranch house could handle. We'd also only just moved in, so we didn't really have a lot of cooking staples. The caterer said he'd bring everything 75% done, but he needed to finish off some dishes in our kitchen. I told him that was fine as long as he was finished before 5, because the kitchen is centrally located, and we prefer everyone to be finished before the guests arrived, due to the intimate nature of the occasion. The man said that would be fine. He arrives as scheduled at 12 p.m. We gave him until 5, and the guests aren't even arriving until around 6, so it's plenty of time. He smelled like actual dog shit, but his accent sounded European, so I thought maybe he just didn't believe in deodorant or something. It was more than a sweat smell, though. It smelled like a sun-baked diaper, and that made me uneasy. He was going to be preparing food for those who were sick prior, and for young kids. I just made sure he washed his hands, and then left him to his own devices, worrying I was just being presumptuous. Throughout the entire process, he kept pulling me aside to ask me questions and have me taste things. I was super busy because my husband had to work during the day and pick up the surprise guest right after, so setting up the deck, decorating, and putting together the slideshow equipment, coordinating the surprise guest, and everything else was my job. Just a million other little details. Being asked every 10 minutes things like, "Do you prefer this with paprika or without?" was getting old. When he was still there at 5:45, after 2 gentle reminders, I flat out told him I needed him completely out by 6 no matter what. He apologized profusely and said there had been a delay because our oven wouldn't stay up to temperature. I'd never had a problem before, but I figured since he's the professional, maybe it was a subtle one. A little before 6 rolls around, a few of our friends start trickling in. I decide to tell him whatever's done is done, and whatever isn't he should just put in the fridge. But suddenly he's nowhere to be found. I go out on the deck to ask my friends if they'd seen him, and he's out there, alcoholic beverage in hand, out of his chef whites and now in tee and jeans, mingling with my friends. I walked out just in time for him to introduce himself to my cousin-in-law as a good friend of mine. No, too weird for me. I met him in person for the first time barely 6 hours ago. I told him he needed to leave, now. He goes inside and gets his bag, and makes a beeline for my bedroom. I'm taken aback. "Excuse me? Where are you going?" "Oh, to change." First of all, we have a guest bathroom clearly visible. Second, why can't he just wear a t-shirt and jeans at home? I tell him I'm not comfortable with him going to my room, but he insists it'll only be a second. He goes in and shuts and locks the door. I couldn't even get a word out before he went in and felt helpless. I was going to go outside to ask one of my friends to help me usher him out, but at that point my fiancé got there with my aunt-in-law. I had to explain the situation to him, nearly in tears at that point. He pounded on the door, and the caterer came out still in the same outfit. My fiancé said, "You shouldn't be in there. You need to leave." The caterer said, "Excuse me, but this is not your house. It's not up to you to decide." My 6'4", 260-pound fiancé tells him that it actually, yes, was his house. He puts his hand on the man's back and guides him to the door. The caterer then says that he thought I lived here. My fiancé responds that I lived there with him, and the caterer goes nuts. He turns to me and screams, "You lied to me, you bitch!" I have no clue what he's talking about. He starts yelling about how I led him on, and calling me all sorts of names. I don't know who he thought the man in the pictures with me around the house was. My fiancé says, "You won't talk that way in my house. Go find the door." The caterer goes into the kitchen and starts throwing the trays of food out of the refrigerator and onto the floor. At that point, my fiancé realized two of his brothers, both currently offensive linemen at the college level, had come in and were on the deck. He signaled to them and they all came inside and basically said, "This guy is harassing me." Since they're a family of all boys and my fiancé is the first to get married, they don't get to flex their protective muscles too often, and jumped at the chance to toss this guy out. The party then went on as planned, but I insisted we just order pizza and throw out all the food he had made. My fiancé and friends kept asking me if that wasn't a bit too much, but I was insistent. We went out late drinking with his brothers and got home at around 3:30 a.m. and passed out in our room. At around 5 a.m., I was woken up to the sound of the door opening. I figured either we forgot to lock the door in our drunken stupor and it blew open, or one of his family forgot their keys or something in the house and didn't want to wake us up. His parents never ever let themselves in when they know we're home, and his brothers had had even more than we did, and were definitely not awake and driving at around 5 a.m. It wasn't nearly windy enough for the door to have been blown open, as it had been a tranquil night. I wake up my fiancé and whisper, "Someone just came into the house." He said the same thing. Probably my brother just left his wallet or something. I figured I was being paranoid and tried to put it to rest, when I hear a loud crashing sound. With that, my fiancé was up and on his feet in one movement. He told me to lock myself in the closet and call 911, while he went and looked around. As I was pulling out my phone, we hear in that distinct European accent, "Hello?" I realized it was the insane caterer. I was not worried about this caterer physically overpowering my husband, or me for that matter, so I charged right out there. He was shirtless and clearly on something. He's taking the pictures that are just of me off the wall and holding several in his arms already. He lunges straight towards me when he sees me, and my fiancé gets between me and him and I call 911. My fiancé tells him the cops have been called, and it's in his best interest to immediately leave. The caterer just starts going on about how he has to make sure I'm okay. I start to ask him why I wouldn't be, but my fiancé rightfully says not to engage with a crazy person and feed into it. My fiancé stays between me and him while I climb out a window. He watches as the caterer throws photos of us all over the floor. My fiancé didn't want to subdue or touch him in any way, so the caterer couldn't make any assault claims. He'd begun to destroy our kitchen at this point, when the cops finally came in. He had a butcher knife. My fiancé considered going for the gun safe when he first got the knife, since we live in a stand your ground state, but he decided the situation was hectic enough without introducing a new firearm. The caterer didn't obey the police's orders to drop his weapon, and just kept saying that he isn't leaving without me, so they tased him. It was lucky for him he only got tased, and didn't antagonize my husband into squishing him. As he's let out in cuffs, he keeps shouting about how he and I are in love, and it figures I chose a macho thug over a sweet, sensitive artist like him. All women's are whores, etc. He continues on in this tirade the entire time the police are reading him his rights. The police ask us to do an inventory of the house and see if anything's missing or damaged, besides what we'd witnessed him do. We go around and there's nothing. But then I remember that he was in our room yesterday and go through the room. All my panties from the dirty laundry hamper were gone, and my vibrator had been moved from where I keep it. We were so freaked out in the aftermath that we replaced all our kitchenware, toothbrushes, and sent our sheets to be professionally cleaned. We had a cleaning crew do a deep clean of the entire house. I'm so glad we decided not to serve the food to our guests. He sent me a letter from prison that thankfully my husband intercepted, because I was still recovering from the whole thing. We gave it directly to the police, who helped us get issued a no-contact order. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison 5 years ago, so he's out by now, but thankfully we never met again. This happened a good few years ago. For some context, I was in my early 20s, single and living by myself. Most of my family lived about a 4-hour drive away from me. I was working for a small call center that provided, among other things, phone services for a 24-hour plumbing company, so they needed someone to be on the line at all times. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to whenever my boss showed up to pick up the line, which was usually about 6 a.m. I worked in a building that housed several businesses of the same sort, call center work mostly, though we were the only ones that had 24-hour services. Because of budget cuts, I was always the only operator on my floor. The only people in the building that night were myself and the security guy, who came to do his rounds about twice a night. Now, because the line had to be on 24/7, I was never allowed to disconnect while I was there. I ran to and from the bathroom, ate meals sitting in front of the computer, and every once in a while sneaked a cigarette at the window within the side of the screen. Only the light above my computer was on. Everything else was turned off when everyone went away at around 10 p.m., so I was left in this half-darkness beneath a spotlight. I desperately needed that job to support myself, so despite the crap conditions, I kept repeating to myself that it wasn't that bad. Things were usually quiet after 10 p.m. I could use the extra hours on my paycheck and didn't need to get a second job. I did a lot of reading and even considered going back to school because, if nothing else, the night shift would afford me plenty of time to study. So one night around 2 a.m. or so, I got a call. I introduced myself as I always did. "Hello, you were calling so-and-so. My name is Jill. How may I help you?" The guy on the other side repeated my name and hung up immediately. Working phone services on the night shift, you get used to a lot of weird stuff, so I shrugged it off and went back to my book. He then called again and asked if he was speaking to Jill. I said yes, repeated the company name, and asked him how I could help. He hangs up again immediately. The third time around, he asks if this is Jill on the phone, and I ask to whom I'm speaking. He hangs up again. The next time he calls, he's breathing hard on the phone and tells me he wants me to talk to him and he's not going to hurt me. I jot down his phone number and I start hanging up whenever his calls pop up, which was for the better part of an entire hour. This went on for months. When he realized I was hanging up every time I saw that number, he began calling from a restricted number, meaning I never knew if it was a legit call, and ended up answering. All the time, this guy keeps saying he wants me to talk to him, and that he's not going to hurt me. The one time I counted, I hung up on this guy over 200 times in one night. Every time he would call, I'd say the company name, and as soon as I heard him, I'd hung up. I complained to my boss, but she did nothing. Instead, she laughed the whole thing off, because this guy obviously didn't know where I was, and he was only a voice on the line and I was perfectly safe. Sometime into this, I started talking to my coworkers, and here's where it started to get really creepy. He never called on my days off, when someone else would be covering my shift. Indeed, at one point I even changed shifts with a coworker to attend a wedding, and he didn't call at all that day. As time went by, I was getting pretty spooked by the whole situation, and the fact that my boss did zero to try and stop this. My coworkers were all sympathetic, and told me that if my boss did nothing, I should file a complaint directly myself. I'm not sure I could, because this wasn't happening on my personal number. None of them could really walk me home, since I was the only operator in night shift. Everyone else was gone by the time my boss arrived and I left the office. I got a little paranoid, because obviously this guy knew my schedule pretty well, and even if I changed shifts, he would only call if he knew I was on the line. It had to somehow be someone who could see me. I started doing commute with my cell phone in hand at all times, with the emergency number dialed in just in case. Sometimes I did the whole commute on the phone with friends or relatives to keep calm. Since it's illegal to carry pepper spray here, at one point I considered walking around with a box cutter in my purse. That's how afraid I was. One day before my shift started, I was at the entrance of the building smoking a cigarette before going up, and I see a security guy come by. Same fellow who usually did the night shift, this huge man. I didn't really know him, never spoke to him much, only said good evening or goodbye when I went by his desk, and whenever he came to my floor to do his rounds. I usually kept to myself and never really made small talk or anything, just greeted him out of politeness and he greeted me back. He asked for a light, so I gave him my lighter, and he told me he'd been fired and he was going home. He went on to tell me that he always got the impression that I was afraid of him, since I was never friendly or welcoming. He then told me he was never going to hurt me, and just walked away. I lost every drop of blood I had in me. I went inside to tell my boss the whole thing, and discovered the man had been fired for harassing a woman on other floors, going as far as trying to corner someone in one of the elevators. The complaints filed up, and he lost his job. Most of the time his shifts matched directly with mine, so he would see me come in at 8 p.m. and left before I did. I asked my boss for that phone number again, to come forward on this guy, asked the security number if that was his number. She told me she threw it away. When I told her the whole story, she found it cute. Then she asked me if I was sure it was him, because a voice on the phone is different and maybe you got it wrong. Quality assurance told us time and again that our every call was recorded, so I demanded the recordings. That's when I found out that, again because of budget cuts and whatnot, the night shift was never recorded, so I had no evidence. Once the guy was fired, the calls stopped. I didn't work there for much longer after that.